Hey guys and girls, you're not here this Sunday in Children's Church, but we're doing a lesson for you. And I wanted to do it on one of my favorite characters in the Bible, Abraham. He is actually one of the most famous characters in the Bible, and he has a lot written about him in the book of Genesis, and then he's quoted or talked about in several other books of the Bible. Now, when you think about character, when I say character, and you think about this person, who might you think about? Now, let's not talk about my drawings, okay, guys? They're a little sketchy. All right, so we won't talk about my sketchy drawings, but this is Abraham. Now, when I talk about characters, I want you to think about a character that you know. Maybe it's something you learned in school, or somebody you learned about in school. Maybe, let's go way back in our history and talk about people like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Martin Luther King Jr., Sacagawea, Harriet Tubman, maybe Meriwether Lewis, or any other person. You might think about those people when I say who is a famous character that you know. But you may have read and studied on your own, and you might think about a musician, and you might think about an artist, or you might think about an athlete or a sports person. And so when I say character, one of the things that you learn when you studied about them, they're regular people just like you and I. They lived in families just like you and I. They have friends. They have favorite foods. They have places that they like to go. They had things that they like to do as a kid. Well, when we talk about Abraham, we are talking about an ordinary guy. We're talking about a guy who lived just like you and I did, who had favorite foods and favorite places to go and things he liked. But yet God called him to something different, and he lived in a different way than we can really, and it's the same thing that God has called us to today. So that's why we want to talk about him. And let's talk a little bit about Abraham, okay? And, let me show you. This over here is, let's just imagine for a moment, this is Abraham's house. Okay, I don't know what kind of house he had, but it was probably some sort of tent-like structure, but it was settled. It was in the same place, and he knew where it was going to be. And over here we have Abraham's ranch. Now, a ranch is a place, it's kind of like a farm, but instead of having a lot of vegetables, it usually has a lot of animals. And we know that Abraham was a man who had a lot of animals. He had goats and sheep and camel and probably a lot of others, but those were the main animals that he had. Now, he lived in a place called Ur. U-R. And actually, Ur was a really famous place in history, and we'll talk more about that another time, but he lived in Ur. Now, these are the places that I just imagine Abraham would like to go to. Now, I have a favorite restaurant that I like to go to. I have a favorite coffee place I like to go to. You probably have a favorite restaurant that you like to go to, or a favorite place that you like to go get a treat, or maybe you like to go to the library or something like that. Well, Abraham had those in his town too, because he was a normal person just like you and I. So I'm going to imagine that this place here was Abraham's favorite place to get camel milk. Yeah, I bet that Abraham and his dad had a favorite place in Ur that they went to and drank camel milk. That was probably a specialty for them, and they probably enjoyed it. I don't know that they did that, but they were normal people just like you and I, so we can imagine that. Abraham has a nephew named Lot, and I can just imagine Abraham watching Lot grow up, and I can just imagine him watching Lot participate in the games that people at that day would have participated in. Maybe Lot did camel races. Okay? He might not have. I don't know. But Abraham was a normal guy, and he would have done and liked normal things just like you and I. But Abraham was unique in that he had a relationship with God. He sought the one true God in a city that was busy doing what everybody wanted and for whatever they wanted it for, to just satisfy themselves. Abraham was living a distinct and different life. And God spoke to him one day, and I'm going to read to you what God said to Abraham. He said this: "Go from your country, your people, and your father's family, and go to a land that I will show you. And then he says this, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and on whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on the earth will be blessed by you. So God called Abraham, and he said, Abraham, I want you to abandon everything that you know, everything that is favorite and normal to you, and I want you to go somewhere else. Now, where is the else that God wanted him to go? Where the else was a place over here called Canaan. It was a long ways from where Abraham was, and Abraham probably would not have visited this prior in his life. He may have. He's 75 years old at this point in time, so he might have already been there. But it's way over here, and you have to leave. You have to cross the desert. You have to go through mountainous areas, and you have to go to a place that you don't know and plan to live there. And that's what God called Abraham to do. And the Bible tells us this. So Abraham went, or at that time his name was Abram. We'll talk about that another time. But Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he took off from Haran. He and his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all of the possessions that they had accumulated, and all the people that they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Now, Abraham leaves everything that he knows that is familiar to him. He takes his wife and his nephew. His brother, we find out at another point in time, had died, and Abraham had taken on the responsibility of his nephew. So he takes his wife and his nephew with him, and he leaves. He also takes a lot of servants and slaves that were responsible and required to stay with Abraham. So Abraham takes those people, he takes all his possessions and all of his stuff, and he leaves. Well, here's what I want you to think about for just a minute. I want you to think about this. When he did that, here's what he was saying. He believed that God had something better than what he could see. Because if he lived in Ur, he knew what the richest person in Ur would look like. He knew what the biggest house in Ur looked like. He knew what it looked like to be successful in this city. And God called him to go somewhere else. So he took and he removed what he could see, and he believed God for something different. Okay, so we're going to use this. We're going to once again draw another picture here. And this is of an eye. All right, believe me, that's an eye. It looks like an eye. All right, and so we're going to draw another one here to make it a little bit more obvious. That's the inside part of an eye, whatever that is. One of you smart kids can tell me. And so he took what he could see and believed something better. Okay, it took a lot of effort. He had to probably sell a lot of things. He had to pack up his home that he lived in. He had to make it mobile. He had to get his animals ready. He had to train his herders and how to move the animals. I mean, he had a lot to do, and he left. So what is happening here, and why is this important? Well, in the book of Hebrews, there's a chapter called the chapter of faith, the hall of faith. And in that, Abraham is mentioned. And specifically, it says this: by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in a promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him. Now listen to this. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Now, I want you to think for just a minute. Abraham is not thinking that he's going to go to Canaan and find and build the biggest, baddest city in the world. What Abraham is looking for is a place where God sits on the throne. And that place came to fruition thousands of years later in the person of Jesus Christ. And Jesus, when he took and lived on this earth among humans, loved us, cared for us, ministered to people, and then took all the blame and shame of the world upon himself. He built that city that we cannot see with our eyes. Abraham was looking for something that you can't see with your eyes. When you and I begin to think about what it means for faith, to have faith, when you're 9, you're 10, you're 8, 11, 12, whatever age you may be, and you say, what does it look like to have faith? Well, one of the ways we can think about that is, do we think that happiness comes by having things? Do we think that goodness comes by getting more? Or are we willing to live in the way that we believe that God has something special for us? One of the cool things about working with guys and girls like you when you're young is that y'all look at things and you love to learn. Well, don't just love to learn from the pages of a book or from an athletic field or from a concert or even a TV show. Love to learn from the people that God has placed in your life and live a life of faith. And like Abraham, sometimes you have to take and turn your back on everything that makes sense. Your places, getting more, having more, being secure. And you have to believe that God is doing something greater. So some of you might be in a new school this year. Some of you have new teachers. Some of you have the same teachers. And all of those, to fully experience them as God would have us to do, is going to require faith on our part to believe that God is doing something bigger and better than we can ever imagine. We're going to spend a few weeks studying Abraham, and we're going to see his life of faith. And it's going to challenge us to think about what it means to serve God. Thank you. I'll see you again soon.